Hey guys, so last week, my uncle, who was also my godfather, he passed away. And this was very sad. It was devastating because I loved him very much. And it got me thinking, I hadn't had a lot of death in my life. I'd been lucky enough to go through most of my life without really losing anyone who I was very close to. And this all changed come the pandemic when I lost both of my grandfathers. And now, just a bit later, I lose this uncle. And so it's in this time I've done a lot of thinking about death and how to process it, how to confront it. And in the spirit of this channel being focused on anti-escapism, I figured I'd share how I look at it so that you can show up and confront death head on to, the extent that you can, and not run away from it and not feel like you need to hide from it. So hopefully this will be helpful to some of you guys out there, because I'm sure, most of you have already lost someone, and even if you haven't, then you will eventually. The first thing that I think is very important, at least from my perspective, is to refuse to make an enemy out of death, because at the end of the day, it's coming for us all. We are all going to die. And the more we accept that fact and we meditate upon that fact in a healthy way, the more it's going to help us live our life to the fullest, because we're like, hey, our time's limited here, so let's use this time well. And so I almost see it as like the passing of a loved one as like their final great reminder to live your life well, because it's not going to be going on for forever. And if that sets the framework, then the next piece is to try and figure out how to handle the emotions, right? Because pain's going to come up, sadness is going to come up. Who knows what other kinds of feelings could come up depending upon your relationship to that person. If your relationship's rather complicated, there might be all kinds of other things like anger, resentment, like guilt, and all that kind of stuff. But with all of that, I try to look at all of that as a very special and unique experience, because typically, you can't feel everything you feel about a person when they're alive. At least I can't. It's hard. It's for the people who are around you, you can maybe if you really, really think about it, you can sort of tap into your full perspective on that person. But I think in a lot of ways, it's almost just hidden from us while they are still there. But when they die, it's like that veil is peeled back, and you're given a very unique opportunity to feel the full depths of how much that person has impacted you. And so for me, when I'm feeling the sadness of someone passing, I try to embrace that as much as I possibly can, because that's me feeling all the love that I have for that person. That's a way for me to find a profound sense of connection to that person. It's kind of like a bit of a unique sort of way to cherish and celebrate their life. Even if it's painful, it's almost through that pain, you get to find value. Because that's, in a lot of ways, that's how we define value. It's how much pain is something worth, right? You can think about money. It's the representation of, a certain amount of suffering, that people are willing to trade. That's what money is. But when we take that and we apply it to the emotional realm and we think of, oh man, I'm feeling all this pain because this person's gone. What you're really feeling is this is how much I value that person. This is how much I love that person. And so instead of trying to hide from that pain, I try to embrace it, because that's me feeling my love for them. The other piece is to think about these people, right? To let their spirit live on and live in a way in which would make them happy, right? And if they're a good person, they were, a loving person and stuff, what would they want to see you do? They would want to see you flourish. They would want to see you thrive. They would want to see you use your life to the fullest. And what they wouldn't want to see is you tearing yourself to bits. They wouldn't want to see you, becoming horribly depressed. And so it's to some extent, maybe some of that stuff will be unavoidable, depending upon who you are, what your relationship to the person is. If I had lost, my own father, or I lost my wife, or I lost my daughter, I'm sure there would be, a significant level of paralysis involved, where, I would just have to be just there in the morning and doing probably nothing else. But in general, that's not a state to stay in, right? It's, we want to honor what they would have wanted. And I think it might sound silly or whatever to think like that, but I think that's important, because if we're going to take that person's life seriously and we're going to integrate that memory of them into our life, we would want that to make us better. And so we take the best of them, we put them inside of us, and we say, all right, what would make that person happy? And ideally, it would be you live the most authentic, real, and meaningful life that you possibly could. Now, obviously, you don't want to implant any sort of like bad stuff where it's like, oh, I had a troubled relationship with my mother and she was always controlling. And, now that she's passed, I need to like honor her wishes and be controlled by her ghost. It's like, no, not like that, right? Like we're imagining like the best version of that person who, would be someone who loves you deeply and unconditionally. And so you would basically want to apply that to yourself, but use your love to them, your connection to them, as something that spurs and strengthens that process. Now, this next piece might be a little controversial, depending upon the circumstances, but I really don't want to ever call anyone's death a tragedy. Now, that's just something that people might think is crazy, because we're constantly seeing tragic deaths, the young man's life cut too short, or, the man who was an amazing philanthropist dies of, some horrible disease. What a tragedy. And the reason why I don't like that, I'm not saying there aren't bad things that can happen, right? Like if someone gets murdered, obviously the act of someone committing a murder is a horrible thing. But I don't want to call that person's life ending in tragedy. I don't like that, because think about it like this. Like I'm thinking about it from my own perspective. No matter how I die, even if I die in the most horrific or stupid or, just unsightly way, okay? Some kind of just embarrassing or tragic way, like whatever you want to call it. Like I go down badly. I don't want people to call it a tragedy. I don't want them to label my life story as a tragedy. I don't want that, okay? I want them to look at my life and celebrate it, to see it as a triumph in some form or another. And I think everybody wants that. Everybody wants their life to be looked at as something of value, okay, of something of goodness, something of meaning. And when we call someone's life a tragedy, or we say the ending of it's a tragedy, I feel like it's putting this narrative around it that like, it just went wrong. They had this life, but it got screwed up at the end. It's like, no, like I feel like that's just so undignified. It's undignified to the person that you're labeling it in that way. Like one way to think about it is sometimes you will watch a movie and it just doesn't click with you, but other people love it. All right. Like to you, it's like, doesn't resonate with me, or maybe even thought it was bad. Okay. That doesn't mean it wasn't a work of art. It just means that it didn't vibe with you. All right. And I think it's almost like a similar thing with people's lives. It's like, you might see someone's life and the reasons for their passing, like maybe someone, they drank themselves to death. That's not what happened with my uncle here, but say someone did, you go, oh, it was a tragedy. Well, it's like, you don't know what else went into that person's life. You don't know what level, like depths of feeling. You don't know like what their spiritual connection was. You don't know everything that went on. And for you to just put that label on it, I feel like it's selfish and it's short-sighted. And so I try not to do that, because I want to like leave the space for that person's life to have the magic and the meaning and the fulfillment in it, and to just assume that I don't understand it all. And there's no way I'm ever going to understand their life. But what I always want to do is leave that space for the grace of that person's human experience, that person's spirit, that it had everything it was supposed to have in its journey, and to not devalue that. And I think that this is kind of brought all together by my last point, which is I don't think death's really the end. I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic. I believe that there's an afterlife. I believe there's more to it than this. And I know atheists out there, they would call that a cope. It's like, you just believe in the afterlife because it's convenient, because it makes, dealing with death and the idea of death easier. And does it make it easier? Yeah, they have a point on that. But I don't think it's a cope. I think it's just hope. That's all it is just hope. It's the belief that there is more to this, and no one can prove that there's not. And I would say there's even more evidence that there probably is. I mean, like, you hear people about them dying and stuff like that, and they have these, their heart stops on the table and, that kind of stuff, and then they have all these kind of post-death experiences and that kind of stuff. You can look into it. It's pretty wild. But even without all that, it's like, I would choose to believe it because I think it's better. I think it's a better way, a better perspective, and it's hopeful. And I think that we have to live with hope, because otherwise, what are we left with? Cynicism. It's like, all this is, everything that you have, it'll eventually just be nothing. And, that's it. I think that's horribly depressing. I think that everything we have is part of the picture, and it matters a heck of a lot. But I don't think that's all there is to it. And so, I believe we will see our loved ones in the future. And yeah, so I don't know if you guys like this video at all, but hopefully some of you out there got something from it, and it helped you in some regard, brought you some comfort. And yeah, that's pretty much what I have for you today. I'm not going to plug anything. So, ooh yeah, see you all on the next one.